Okay, so let's talk about generating HTML using JavaScript. So far, we talked about getting inside of our HTML with our JavaScript, finding elements, changing some attribute values and things like that. We didn't actually talk about adding things to our HTML using JavaScript. So let's do that now. What I'm going to do, I'm going to create a new HTML file here. I'm going to call this make stuff.html, just some name, doesn't matter. I'm going to close this other one. I'm going to do exclamation sign and tab to get my main HTML body. I will simplify this a little bit so there's less stuff. Just to keep it as simple as possible, I'm going to just remove pretty much most of it from my head section and just leave the character set here and empty body. So if I save this is my make stuff file. If I go to the folder that has this project, see now I have that make stuff HTML. If I double click on it, that should open in my browser, which in this case is Firefox. So the page shows up as an empty page because, well, there's nothing in our body section. There's nothing on this page. So let's now open the console. So if I do right click inspect element, see it shows me basically that same thing I had there. See the body is empty. If I open head section, we have the character set tag. So this is pretty much the HTML we had. Now let's try to add elements to this page. So I'm going to go to the console and I'm going to try to add an H1 inside of this body. So I'm going to go to console here, document, dot. This document has a method called create element. It will accept the element you're trying to create. So it's a string and you just type what element you want. So if I want H1, that would be H1 in quotes like this. If I hit enter, see it gives me this H1 element. But if I go back to my inspector, you'll see that it's not in here. So I created an element here, but it was not really placed in the page at all. I'm going to clear this. What we will need to do, instead of just creating the element to nowhere, we're going to save that element in a variable. So I'm going to say var my h1, so just name for this variable equals to this. So that way we will save that element that we've created, my h1, inside of that variable. So now if I just see what's in there, my h1, you'll see it's just an h1 element. Now how do we take this h1 and put it inside of this body? So what we need to do first, we need to find that body element. That body element doesn't have an ID, but we can find it using the name of the tag. So I'm going to say document get element by tag name, and the tag name is body. And because this is get elements, this is going to return a collection of elements, but there is really only one in this collection. So we're going to do 0 to find the first element. So again, if you don't understand this, you should go back and watch my first videos and then get back to this video. But for here, I'm just going to keep it at this. So right now, if I just run this code, see that returns the body. Inside of that body, there's going to be this method called append child. This will allow us to append a child element inside of this element that we right here go and find. So what is the child element I want to append in that body? I want to append that my h1, which is in a variable. So I'm going to do my h1. So keep in mind that variable names in JavaScript are case sensitive. So if you did uppercase H, you have to match it. So if I just hit enter, let's go check our HTML. So I'm going to go to inspector and now see inside of the body, now we have an H1. So let's now try to find that H1 and remove it from the page. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to do document, get element by elements by tag name. And the name of the tag is H1. And there is only one. So if we do the number 0 element, that should give us that H1. So if I run this code, see that should find that H1. And if I roll over it, see it goes yellow in the background. It's empty. There's no text. But we can see the highlighted area where the text should have been. So now to remove that, we'll take that element, dot, and do the method remove. And if I run this, let's go back to our inspector page, see what happened. And as you can see, my h1 was completely removed from my HTML. So let's try to create a little more complicated h1 instead of just having an empty h1 tag. First, let me just show you in this window what I'm trying to build here. So let's say we're trying to build an h1 with some text. So we'll say some stupid page as the text for h1, and then we'll try to add an ID to that h1 and call that ID title. I'm gonna take this off because I'm not gonna do that here. I want to use JavaScript to actually make it happen, which means I'm gonna have this empty body here, and I'm gonna use my console window to get this all done. So again, first we have to create a variable and hold our newly created elements so that we can later place it in our body. So I'm gonna do var heading equals to document dot create element, and the element I'm trying to create is h1. There it is. Now we should have that h1 inside of that heading variable. Now we'll take that h1, which is currently that heading variable, and what we'll do, we'll add some text inside of that h1. And if you remember our videos, the text content is the inner text inside of our container, and h1 is a container. So we'll set it to some stupid title. And then we also want to add an attribute ID and make it title. So we're going to take that same heading. The way we access our attributes, we just pretty much type the name of the attribute after the name of the element. So we'll do heading.id equals to whatever we want to set it to. So I wanted to set it to title. And now let's just check. If I just run heading, see, now we created this h1 ID title. And if we open this, it basically just gonna show us what's in here. And if I scroll down, at some point we'll see that the text in there is some stupid text. So basically we've made the element, but it's not gonna be in our page yet. We have to place it in our body now. So this is where we're gonna go grab our body element, document get elements by tag name, and the name of the tag is body. And because get elements by tag name returns a collection, we have to get the first item in our collection, and to that item we're gonna append child, and the child we're gonna append is gonna be that heading that we've made on top there. So you can already probably see in the background it shows up, but if we go to our inspector, see we have an h1 with an ID title, and that's the text. And now we should be able to search and find this h1 using that title ID. So if I go back, let me clear this so there's not too much here, and do document.get element by ID and search for that ID title. That should return that h1, and as you can see it does. And then we can take that and remove that element by doing dot remove. And as you can see, our h1 is gone. It's also gone, obviously, from our HTML. So that was fine. Now let's try to do something a little more complicated by trying to add elements inside of elements. So let me just show you what we'll build here, and then we'll just do that in our JavaScript. So I'll just do a div, take this div and add an ID main box. Then inside of this div, we'll try to place an h1, and that will be some stupid text. And below that h1, we'll try to put a paragraph, some more random text, and we'll try to apply an ID to this h1. We'll call it title. And then we'll try to add a class to this paragraph. We'll call it txt. And we'll also apply an ID to that same paragraph so we can see how it's done. So we'll do ID summary or something. Let's actually also, instead of txt, maybe we'll do description. Something like this. So let's try to now generate this HTML using JavaScript. So I'm going to get rid of that. So we'll go back here and again, clear this. Go to our inspector so you can see there's nothing in here. First, let's try to create a div that's supposed to sit inside of this body. So I'm gonna create a variable main div. So that will be document dot create element again. Element I'll be creating is a div. We'll hold it in that variable main div. Now to that div, I wanted to assign an ID. And I'm going to do main div ID equals to, and the ID was, I believe, main box, uppercase B. Now inside of this div, we'd like to place an H1. Now that H1 doesn't exist. So I'm going to keep this main div in mind, and I'm going to create a new element that will be that H1. So I'm going to do var, I'm just going to call it H1. And that will be document, create element. And the element we're trying to create here is H1, like this. To that H1, I wanted to make sure the text inside of that is, which is text content, some stupid title. I also wanted to assign some ID to this. So the ID attribute. So that was the H1. Now we need to take that H1 that has this text and this ID and add it to this main div that we've created on top. So to do this, we'll take the main div and do append child. And the child we're going to append is going to be that H1 variable that holds the H1. So now we should have the main div that includes the H1 in it. So finally, to that same main div, we need to also do another append child to add the paragraph. But to add the paragraph, we have to first create the paragraph. So we're going to do, again, variable paragraph. We're going to take our document, create element. And the element we're trying to create this time is P for paragraph. Now we're going to take that paragraph variable. We're going to set the text content in that variable that holds the container. So the text content of that container is going to be more stupid text here, whatever that's going to be. That's the text. And then we'll take that same paragraph and add an ID. Well, not so much add, but set an ID attribute to this. The ID is going to be summary. And finally, we have to take that same paragraph, if you remember, and add a class to that as well. So I'm going to take that paragraph. And with classes, it's a little more complicated than with just IDs. So we'll do class list. And to this list, we're going to add the new class we need. So here we'll do the class description, was it? So now we should have the paragraph, which has this text, has an ID, and has a class. So now we have to take that paragraph and put it inside of this div as well. So I'll take that main div and we'll again append child. And to that, we're going to append this paragraph variable that holds the paragraph in it. So now we should have basically a div, which is this main div, that has H1 and paragraph in it. Now, if I go to my inspector, we're not going to see any of that because that div was not really applied to our body. So now we're going to take that and put it inside of this body. So to do that, we're going to do document get elements by tag name. The tag is body. And we'll take the first one. And to that, we'll append child. And the child is going to be this main div that holds all that stuff in it. So hit enter, and you can already see in the background something shows up. But if I go to the inspector, see we have now in the body, we have this div with main box ID. If I expand this, you'll see we have an H1 with an ID title with some text. We also have a paragraph with an ID and a class, and then some text in it. And we could, again, work with all of these the same way you would work with anything else if this page just loaded like this. So if I wanted to, for example, take this H1 and add a class to that as well, to this H1 element, now I can just find that element using this title ID. So I'm going to do document get element by ID, and the ID for that is title. Just to confirm we get that element, there it is. We'll find it. Now with that element, I can do again our class list, and we can add whatever class we want to add to that test. So now if I go back to our inspector, see there is a class test applied to that H1. So now let's say I want to just empty this div, the main box div. So I want to get rid of all of these elements that are inside of the main box, but I don't want to remove the main box itself, just the elements that are in it. Now one way we could just go and find all these elements and delete them. But let's say we have a lot of these elements and we just want to empty this main box, right? So what I'm going to do, I'm going to first find that main box by its ID. So I'll do document get element by ID. Let me just clear all of this first and do main box. Let me just test and make sure it gets us the box. It does. So now I'm going to take that, and an easy way to just get rid of everything in there, we'll just take inner HTML and we'll just set it to nothing. So if I do this, see it's all cleared up here. If I go to my inspector, it's just an empty div. If I wanted to remove the actual div box itself, this is where I would have to just take this and do remove, and that should remove the box. So hopefully this gives you an idea how we actually build elements inside of our HTML. So we should be able to add pretty much anything else. If you want to add an input box, it's the same process. You would just create a variable inp for my input box and do document dot create element. And the element I'm going to create, the input element, is name of the element, input. So now in that input element, you usually have the attribute type to set the type of input. A text box, that would be text. If I want a number box, that would be a number. If I want a date picking box, that would be a date. I'm going to set it as date. I can also, again, play with different attributes as well. So if I want to add an ID to that, I'll say my date. Input elements are not containers, so you cannot do text content. So let's just put this in the DOM. So I'm going to now take my document, find the body, and use this again, body, and get the first thing in there, append child, inp. So now you should see, hopefully you can see in the background, I should probably zoom in here. See, we have a date picker, which is the result of adding this input in the body. Very commonly, you'll see this div with an ID app, and basically they just add everything inside of that div. That's also a better idea a lot of times than, see, I have to go and find this body by getting the body element and getting the first in that collection, because this returns a collection. So that way you can just escape this and just find something by ID by just having a div with an ID and add it to it. So that means that initially we would just take our HTML and add a div with an ID app, or really any ID, and then basically put everything else inside of that div. If I just reload this, Go back here, see there's body, there's this div ID app. And now I could just find that div with this ID and add elements to it. So I would do var, let's do a link this time. Link, it's gonna be document, create element, and the element is an anchor hyperlink. So for a hyperlink to work, we need to set href attribute, hyperlink reference, some link. Doesn't really matter. It's going to be the link. We will also have some text for the user because the hyperlink has text content. It's a container. We should be able to do that. Click me. And then we'll take that link and add it to our div. Now, before I add it, let me also set the target attribute. And we'll do underscore blank to force that to open in a new page. And now I should be able to take the link and put it inside of this div with an ID app. So I'm going to find the div by doing document.getElementById, and the ID is app. And to that, we're going to append child. And the child we're going to append to it is going to be the link we've made on top. So link. You'll see we have the link right there. If I go to my inspector, see if I open this div, we have a hyperlink with a target blank. That should take us to Google with the text, click me. So there it is. And if I click on this, that should do exactly that. And that should be it for this video. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.